What's going on, party people? Welcome back into another edition of the Morning Glory Show. We're coming fresh off our Super Bowl, but it is time to get back into some Titans stock. And just like the Samuel L. Jackson said, we're going to hop right into it today. So I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Jonathan Miller at Esports Valen. You can follow me at Glory Day Sports. How you doing today, Jonathan?
Good, man. Good. Samuel L. Jackson, he knows what's up, man. That's so funny. When I watched that happen, in the back of my mind, I went, did he just say that? I'm going to meme that. And then, of course, everybody on Titans Twitter had the same thought, including the Titans. So I thought that was pretty funny. But
as soon as it happened, I went straight to Twitter because I knew what was going to happen. Thoughts on the halftime performance? Because every year, it is highly debatable. Personally, I loved it, but I get that.
Sorry, I was hot and cold on it. There were moments like, obviously, you knew Not Like Us was coming, and that was going to be exciting, and it was. I like Kendrick a lot. I just think he's more of like a performative artist in terms of his art form with his music. Like his music is poetry to me. And it's not exactly like halftime exciting type of stuff. Like I was excited to maybe get like the performance we got from Kendrick in the small when Dr. Dre did his thing for the LA Super Bowl. The small performance we got from Kendrick had like some of his bigger songs, some of those big hype moments. So I was kind of hoping for like Money Trees and stuff like that. Or even some stuff from his newer albums I would have been excited about. But yeah, it was good. I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I was just kind of in the middle. I was like, cool, whatever. But I am excited for a potential T-Pain halftime show, which might have sprung from that. So
that would be really cool. Which isn't that was his home state when they just performed it, if I remember correctly.
No, he's from
maybe I'm incorrect.
Tallahassee, Florida.
Oh, that is correct. You're right. But yeah, I think T-Pain would do it awesome well. And Kendrick, he just has such a vast catalog. I mean, you can't make everybody happy. Everybody's going to be mad at the halftime performance every single year. I don't care who is performing.
So it's going to be something.
It's just what it is. But about the Super Bowl, I mean, it was if you're Patrick Mahomes Chiefs fans, didn't go too well. If you're an Eagles fans or you're just cheering against Patrick, it was a good game. I still enjoyed it for the beatdown that it was. And I think it just kind of goes to show what Howie Roseman has done for that team. Was there anything that really just stood out to you in that game for how they just kind of dismantled that entire team and what the Titans could maybe learn from that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing that stood out all game was how well the defensive line played. They got after it and they didn't have to send a ton of pressure. I think actually statistically, I think they did 0 blitzes. They didn't even have to blitz. They didn't have to send extra pressure because that front line was just wreaking havoc. And that goes, and all those guys are first round picks, I think. I could be wrong, but
a first round pick. I don't recall.
I don't know, maybe a second rounder, but either way, just a very, very impressive performance from the defensive line. And then, of course, the reaction that happened from that was like, see, this is why you draft Abdul Carter, because defense wins championships. And Abdul Carter's tweet and like got that drummed up. And I think the main takeaway here is that the Eagles, top to bottom, are the best roster in football. From a roster construction standpoint, every position group excels. They have a great secondary. They have an awesome defense at every point. Even the middle of their defense, which is technically like the weakest part of the team, is still good players in that linebacker group. And then offensive line, arguably the best offensive line with one of the best offensive line, if not the best offensive line coaches. You have fantastic receivers, awesome skill positions, and one of the best, if not the best, running back in football behind there. So like, and honestly, I've been a pretty big on Jalen Hurts since he came out of college. I think he was going to end up being a very good player, and he has. He played very well in that game. You can't really take that away from him, even though he has a really amazing supporting cast. He played phenomenally well in that game, and by the way, played really good in the first Super Bowl too. he would have been the MVP if they won that Super Bowl also. So
I think I saw a stat he had 4 touchdowns in the first one, and maybe it was 3 in the first one, 4 in this one.
Three rushing touchdowns in the first
Yeah.
one. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I just think, like, to me, what that says is that the roster construction, it just really goes to show this was a complete football team on the other side. And for the Chiefs, to be honest with you, they're always going to be a good football team, but I think they were a little exposed this year. They weren't quite as good as they've been in previous years. They won what felt like 6 or 7 games that they should have lost.
It just felt like they just lucked out every week, and then it just kept continuing, and they were still undefeated, and it just kept rolling down. And I don't think the wheels ever really fell off. I mean, they made it to the Super Bowl, for God's sakes. But no, I do agree. And we'll hop into these comments. We got Air Fryer Iron Chef. Teams going to overcorrect on DE this draft after this Super Bowl. I do want to talk a little bit about that, because you guys know I'm big on Abdul Carter. I think he is probably my number 1 prospect. And I do agree, though. People are overvaluing what happened in that game. I think you could talk about how bad the offensive line was for the Chiefs and how they should address that just as much as you could accredit that defensive line. I think Nick Sirianni gets not enough credit. I get that he is obnoxious. He is Philly to a T, but at the end of the day, he is a very good football coach, and he builds culture. And what Howie Roseman has done has just been a masterclass as a GM since he's been there. And I think it can't be overstated that he doesn't reach for need. He drafts talent where talent is due. And that's how he ended up with a Jalen Hurts in the 2nd round when they still had Carson Wentz coming off one of his best years of his career. It was just good value. And they just keep addressing the front 7 and the offensive side and the defensive side. And that's how they put together that Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Brandon Graham, Josh Sweat. And they built that pass rush, was just not letting those guys slide down the board because they needed something else. And then you look at that secondary, obviously White Chocolate Cooper DeJean takes that pick 6 back to the house and does it. I mean, I was super high on Cooper. I thought he should have gone on the 1st round pick. And I love Tavondre Sweat. You will see him on the graphic today because I love Tavondre Sweat. But Cooper DeJean, I think, had a great talent. There was always that highly debated topic. Is he a corner? Is he a safety? I'm telling you right now, if he was on this team, he would be a safety because we got Amani Hooker, and that is absolutely it under contract. But I think you can learn a lot from that and not reaching for these players that you go, we need a right tackle. I get it, guys. We don't have a right tackle. NPF is not the answer. John Ojukwu is not the answer. But at the end of the day, this isn't a very talented right tackle group at the top of the class. There's depth for days in this. And I think you can get a guy that might be able to play some snaps even on day 3 early into their careers over the guys they kind of currently have. But I'm not going to come out here and say, hey, you have to grab. I'm not going to throw shade at any of these players, but I'm not going to say you have to reach in the 2nd round for a tackle that doesn't match the talent of some of these edge rushers and some of these other positions that are going to be on the board at that certain pick. You're at 35, you're getting a 1st round talent for a 2nd round value.
Yep.
So that's what you got to kind of learn. And I think Mike Bergonzi has that understanding, but I know you're very big on the quarterback 101. And we can debate that as well. And at the end of the day, most important position in all of football. So there's not a right or wrong, in my opinion, of what they do with the 101. It's get a guy that you believe in and you go from there. And we'll hop into Anthony Russo's question here in just a second as well. And we can talk about that trade down option as well. So I do want
to respond to that comment really quick, though. The defensive ends thing, I kind of lean on the opposite side. Like, I think edge rusher is, and the defensive line in general, but edge rusher is a premium position. And it's very obvious that when you can rush the quarterback effectively, everything else on your team is, going to be a little bit more effective, right? Like, if you're getting to the quarterback and you're stopping drives early and you're getting your offense the ball back, that's a really big deal. And that's exactly what the Eagles did in the Super Bowl. But what I was saying that entire time, and a lot of Titans fans were saying, see, this it was just further justification to take Abdul Carter, which makes sense and a fair argument. But the point that I will forever stand on is that the most important position is the quarterback. And if you get that right, and your quarterback is someone who can march out there and be the reason why you win, then all the other position groups improve as well, right? Because here's the thing. Do you think that we would be saying that our defensive line is underperformed and couldn't get to the quarterback and all the other things if Will Levis had maybe capitalized on some of the drives that the defense gave him the ball back on? Do you think that we would be saying the same things about our defense if Will Levis was a bit more efficient and maybe scored a little bit more and turned the ball over a little bit less? I would venture to say that if we had more competent quarterback play last year, then we would be speaking a lot more highly about this defense, and we would be a lot less critical of how the defensive line performed. And by the way, I mean, it's again, I've been pounding the table on this point for so long, and I keep saying it because it's still so important. It's not something that you find on a stat sheet, but when your quarterback play is elevated, it makes everyone else better. And especially the defense, because then the defense can have a really good drive, it doesn't result in a turnover, but it does result in a turnover on downs, and the offense on the other side punts the ball, and then you get your offense the ball back. That energizes them. Whenever your quarterback marches out there, has a long drive. I mean, we saw it in Will's debut in that clip that we've all seen a million times, where Jeffrey Simmons is like, that's Will damn Levis. Like, he's so proud of his quarterback. And that is going to elevate the play of everyone, especially your defense. So that's kind of the point I'm trying to make here, is that, yes, we saw the Eagles defensive line dominate. We saw them dominate. But more importantly, they were a complete football team. And when that defense gave the ball back over to their offense, they capitalized and they put points on the board. And that's really where we're looking. So to me, that's why I'm so heavily like, you got to get the quarterback position figured out, and then you can start building around that player. Because if you have a quarterback that can do that, right, whether it's like Stafford, Rodgers, Cam Ward, whoever, right, then when you build the pieces around you, and by the way, the pieces that you currently have on the team, all those guys get better. This was a toxic year for the Tennessee Titans, mostly because the Rand Carthon era added a lot of really good talent, but then we didn't get to see that talent manifest because the quarterback play was so bad. That's kind of where I sit with it.
I don't think anybody's arguing that Will Levis was one of the worst quarterbacks in all of the NFL last season. And it almost all comes down to the turnovers. That was the biggest part of it. It's turnovers in terrible situations. And it started at the beginning of the season that way, and it ended the season the same way. But I think it was Easton Freeze, friend of the show, put out a tweet months ago. I think it was in the latter half of the season, but we were looking at the statistical offense for the Titans, and they take out the turnovers. They were a top 10 offense last year. And I think that goes to show what was happening behind the scenes with that. So at the end of the day, I think Will Levis could improve. He'll still be on the roster this next season. Just because he's going to be a cheap backup. That's what you want. You could maybe draft one of these guys in the first round and say, hey, Will's the starter. Let them kind of see how things progress. And in week 2, ultimately, when Will Levis loses you the football game, week 3, week 4, that's when you can make that turn. And I'd be okay with that. It should be a quarterback competition. I don't care who they bring in. I don't care if it's Aaron Rodgers or, like you said, Matthew Stafford, whoever it is. I'm saying, hey, it's a quarterback competition and we're going forward. But at the end of the day, and your head shake shows it, we know the answer. It's not Will Levis, but I still want to look and see how that development goes. Mason Rudolph probably won't be on the team next year, but they do have to address the position regardless of its free agency or draft. And if they're going free agent route, I'm still maybe throwing a flyer at one of these guys late in the draft and seeing if he can maybe beat out Will Levis. And I'd be fine with that.
I think what's funny, Jake, you remember this because I proposed it on this show. It was like week 7 or so. And I said, would it be so crazy if the Titans traded for Matthew Stafford? And at the time, it didn't make a ton of well, okay, at the time it made sense on both sides because the Rams were not very good. They were in a bad spot.
They turned it around a little bit.
We did not. Turned it around, right? They of course turned it around because they had Matthew Stafford. So there's probably one scenario where I'm okay with the Titans not drafting a quarterback at 101, and it's trading for Matthew Stafford. And I think it's 100% worth it. There's maybe one or two other quarterbacks where I'd be okay with the Titans not drafting a quarterback. But I do think that the best course of action, and some people are going to be like, man, that's a lot of resources at quarterback. I do think the best course of action is to sign a vet bridge, someone like Rodgers. Rodgers would probably be my top pick for outside of Stafford. Stafford is my number one choice at quarterback, just to be clear.
I would agree.
But if, signing Rodgers for like a 2-year deal where after the second year you can get out because all the money's front loaded, and then drafting a quarterback to sit behind him for a year, that to me is like, okay, quarterback position, check. Brian has his guy that he can get competitive with right away. So you don't have to worry about him losing his job, which is in their best interest, especially if they're drafting a young guy. And then you also have the young guy who doesn't have to rush out into the field. And then you have that hope, you have those dreams, you have all those things that you've now sold your fan base. And now we're sitting here as Titans fans and the Titans organization going, cool, quarterback position's figured out. We're good. Like, we don't have to worry. Now you can freely and openly just be like, okay, cool. Now we're going into pick 35. We can take a tackle or an edge rusher, whichever is there for us. And then, hopefully you've solidified one of those two spots in free agency, and then you can very freely go whatever other position you need to go at that point. And then you're good. I mean, heck, you could trade down from 35, get a third round pick, go lower in the second, and then have a normal top of the draft. I mean, you could even go that route. So I think that the quarterback discussion is obviously going to continue to rage on until we have some clarity. I think there's a good chance they sign or trade for a quarterback, and then many people are going to go, okay, now it's time to trade down. And that's exactly what the Titans and Mike Borgonzi are going to want people to think, because right now they need to drum up interest for that pick. They need the Saints to want to jump all these guys and go get Shador or something crazy. They need something crazy to happen so that way they can have some serious discussion about, okay, maybe it does make sense to go down, because the Titans can go a couple different routes. Like, they could go acquire Kirk Cousins, and maybe Kirk says, hey, I have 2 or 3 years in me. And then they're like, okay, well, we don't necessarily need a quarterback if we do that. Now we can go in a different direction and build the rest of the team. Or maybe they decide that's the case with Matthew Stafford. Well, we don't necessarily need – Matthew's going to be like, hey, I want to play 2 to 3 years. So there's just like a lot of options here. If the Titans do get a favorable, not Derek Carr, they get a favorable free agent quarterback bridge option, then there's a reality where it's like, okay. And to me, it's really only one guy, which is why I say that. It's Stafford. If you get Stafford, then Miss Amy can be excited about her quarterback. She doesn't have to be like, oh, no, we have to have the future, though I still think they will try to draft somebody and sit behind him. But like, you get Stafford, maybe Will sits behind him, right? Then in that case, it would make some sense to keep Will, because you've already developed him a little bit. You have Stafford for 1 to 2 years. Then you can kind of try to roll that out again. That could make some sense. But other than that specific scenario, I do think it's in their best interest to sign a vet, draft the guy at 101, and be done and be happy with where you're at. You're like, cool, the future's solidified at the position. Now we can truly move on and build the rest of the team.
And when you look at the mountaintop that is this front office, I mean, it's Mike Borgonzi and Chad Brinker. We're looking Green Bay, Kansas City. What happened with Patrick Mahomes' first year? He sat the entire year. What happened with Jordan Love?
They traded for Alex Smith, by the way. They traded for him.
Yes.
So that sounds like the exact thing that could happen here is all I'm saying.
No, I think it's a very real possibility that Titans fans aren't talking about enough. And if that's the case, I would lean more so Cam Ward over Shador Sanders, just because I think that ceiling is more reminiscent to the mentioned Mahomes and Love. Shador, I think, has it between the ears. He's been groomed. He's been ready for this. So I don't think he needs as much time potentially, but the ceiling might not be as high. And that's perfectly fine either way. And I like and love both guys, and I'd be happy with either of them with the 101. Let's go ahead and hop into these comments. And Anthony Russo here, fellow draft professor, what should the Titans' price be if the Jets want to move up from 7th overall?
Which I love this conversation.
This is very interesting to me, and I actually did kind of put out a thing on Twitter earlier this week from somebody else that put out an article discussing it. And when you look at it, the Jets, they have the 7th pick overall. And the only realistic scenario I see the Titans making that move is they have to acquire some top-tier talent from the team as well, because you're missing out on all of the blue chips there at 7. Because you're looking at the quarterbacks, you're looking at Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, Will Johnson, Travis Hunter, of course. And then you're left with maybe like, we'll consider blue chip. Ashton Genty would be probably the only remaining one, and we're not going that direction. So you have to send us Garrett Wilson. That's the only scenario that I currently see. And with that, we're getting your 7th pick, and we have to get next year's first. So it's going to be a lot to move up from 7 to 1, as it should be. But I don't see that as a super realistic scenario for the Titans. I think if they're moving down, I think it's 2, 3, or 6. I think the Raiders could also be on that. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think so. What's happening right now is there's a lot of like smoke around what the compensation, excuse me, I'm all phlegmy this morning, guys. What the conversation should be around compensation. And for the Titans, obviously the concept is like, okay, we really need to leave this draft with one of these top 4 players, right? Whether it's one of the quarterbacks, Abdul Carter, or Travis Hunter. That's kind of the consensus, right? Everybody, those are the players everybody wants. But to be honest, I think the Titans are going to be more prepared. So I don't love the trade down scenario where you don't solve the quarterback position, right? And so it's harder for me to wrap my brain around this, but there is a reality where the Titans accept a trade down with a Jets, with a Raiders at 6, and still be able to pick a good player. So obviously the conversation is around those top players, right? Those top 4 players. Mason Graham, a really good talent, but probably not going to be a Titan for the reasons that the Titans are the strongest, maybe at that position than anything. They don't need an interior defensive lineman. However, there's a couple of other players that are intriguing, right, around that spot. Tetero and McMillan falling to maybe like a 6 or 7 if you're picking there is really interesting. If you're trading with the Jets and you acquire Garrett Wilson, then maybe not. But you see where I'm going with this. So I think the compensation would have to be a lot, because the Titans are not going to be willing to trade down and miss out, even if they decide quarterback is not the way to go. They are not going to trade down with that team necessarily and say, okay, and so, okay, let me wrap this up. The reason why I do think they're going to acquire a quarterback, a veteran quarterback, they're going to sign a Rodgers, they're going to trade for a Stafford, they're going to, trade for a Cousins, something. So they're going to bring somebody in that's going to seem like they are the starter, because the Titans need the Giants to have the coal on their feet. They need the Browns to have the coal on their feet. They need to have the Raiders have the coal on their feet, because they need desperately for the Jets and the Saints to have legitimate interest in trading up. Hell, they need like the Steelers to have legitimate interest in potentially trading up, right? Like they need a quarterback team that's kind of like, or a team that kind of is like half and half on a quarterback type of deal. Mm-hmm. They need the interest to be there, so that way they can drum up that pick. And so what's most likely going to happen is the Titans are going to stay and take a quarterback, but they're going to sign somebody and they're going to make it seem like they are 100% trading this pick. And then that is going to drum up that interest. And then who knows? Maybe the Jets do trade up and they decide they want one of these guys and they're willing to dump, a couple of assets. But yeah, to me, if it were the Jets, to wrap this up, if it were the Jets and the Titans had a quarterback solution, whether that be a Cousins, Rodgers, whoever, right? To me, it would have to be Garrett Wilson. It would have to be the 7th pick. And it would have to be probably a pair of 2nd-round picks, probably a future third. It would have to be some serious compensation up at the top. Yeah, the Jets pick 7, 42, 90. They have the Lions 3rd-round pick, and then they don't have their own. They have the Lions 3rd-round pick at 92, and then they have the 108 in the 4th and 145. So it would probably be 7, 42, the 2nd-round pick next year, Garrett Wilson, and probably like a 4th. it would need to be pretty significant. And honestly, for the Titans at that point, then you're cool. Because then, like, maybe you look at maybe the pick for the Titans at that point is like Will Campbell. And then now you have your bookend tackles. You see what I'm saying? So like there's a reality. Maybe they trade down a little bit further and they take like Luther Burden. Like there's a reality where the Titans can add a ton of talent and scale down this board at the top of the draft and have it make sense. But oh man, guys, I just cannot stress enough. And like the Cam Ward conversation is heated up, and I feel more strongly about Cam Ward being the guy. But what's funny is I just keep getting convinced by Easton Freeze that Shedeur Sanders is just the better fit. And that just makes more sense. And I keep looking at Shedeur tape and I'm like, damn, this kid's got ice in his veins and he makes some damn good throws. He's smart. He doesn't turn the ball over a whole lot. And that's like really what you need. We keep hearing about the quarterback nervous system from Brian Callahan. And every time he speaks, it's like, that's Shedeur. So it's going to be interesting. The Titans are doing a good job of trying to blanket the field with smoke.
I love both guys, and I could be convinced into either, but I've been Team Shedeur since the beginning, and I'm not making the switch. And it does a lot of it is fit, but I think even if it wasn't the Titans, I would still have Shedeur a little bit higher. I'm not going to say that, and I think it was somebody in the comments, MB, the QBs are not what I consider blue chip. I would agree. This isn't Caleb Williams. This isn't Jaden Daniels, Drake May. But we've talked about it on the show many times now. The quarterbacks are a crapshoot. Just because you're not a blue chip talent doesn't mean you can't turn into one in the NFL. And Patrick Mahomes wasn't blue chip. He's the best quarterback maybe of all time.
I just don't love this comparison, guys. I keep running into this as I'm not trying to defend these quarterbacks, but what I am trying to say is that you're the Titans.
You're talented.
You're the Titans and you're picking the first overall pick. You don't have to spend any more capital. You don't have to sign a fat contract. You don't have to do any of that stuff. You can just take the quarterback and be ready to roll. Now, the conversation is these quarterbacks aren't worthy of da-da-da. Okay, then I will flip this question. Nobody's been able to answer this question. Chat, I will ask you. Right now, if you were doing a mock draft, would you have, and this, Jake, I'll pose this question to you first and then to everybody in the chat. If you are doing a mock draft, or just you're having an opinion, if the Titans take, let's say they take Abdul Carter, then at number 2, the Browns take Travis Hunter. Then the Giants are sitting at 3. Who do they take?
It's got to be one of the quarterbacks.
It's got to be one of the quarterbacks, right? Right. Don't even have to think about it. Okay, chat, would you guys all agree? It's a quarterback at 3 for the Giants, correct? Then we can all mostly agree that'll be the case, right? If you're doing your own mock. Okay, so now let's scale it even further. Pick number 4. Let's say it's Mason Graham for the Patriots. I don't know. Or Mason Graham. Pick number 5. Let's say it's Will Johnson. Pick number 6. Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward are sitting there. Who do the Raiders take?
They got to take the quarterback.
They take the quarterback, right? I just spiked my favorite pen. The point is that these 2 quarterbacks are top 6 players if the Titans don't take them. So if you're telling me that both of these guys are good enough to be picked at number 3 overall, how on God's green earth are they not good enough to be picked at 1 overall for a team that needs a quarterback? That doesn't make any sense, guys. So let's be real here. In the evaluation of these quarterbacks, we can all sit here and say that the Titans shouldn't take these guys because they're not worthy of the 101. Well, if you're not worthy of the 101 and the team that's picking number 3 wants to take these guys, and we're talking about the team at number 3 trading to 1 and then doing what, Jake? Taking one of these quarterbacks at the 101. And no one's batting an eye at that idea. So why are we like, dude, neither of these guys should be first overall picks? It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense because we are busy comparing these 2 quarterbacks to the draft class that happened last year, which, by the way, having 5 quarterbacks hit out of 1 draft is unheard of. And we've seen Michael Penix play a little bit of ball. He looked okay. But we're crowning him. We're saying that Michael Penix, if he was in this draft, he would be the 101. He's way better than Cam Ward or Shedeur. The comparison thing is so arbitrary and unnecessary and doesn't make any sense because right now, those guys are not in the same class. We did not evaluate them together. We don't know that if Cam had the type of year that he had this year, if all the other guys were being drafted here, exactly where he would have fit and exactly where teams would have had him. We don't know. Their skill sets are very different. So to me, if we can say all those things about the quarterback position and we're looking at the Titans picking 101, if we are all in agreement that one of these guys are going to be picked at number 3 and everyone's going to be happy about it, then why is it such a problem in the evaluation here that player can't be picked 2 spots before? And have the same level of like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Everyone on the NFL, not NFL Network, but the NFL show or whatever on ESPN, like Mina Kimes did the same thing. The Titans, it just doesn't make any sense for the Titans to have a rookie quarterback. It's just they need so many other things. The team is such a blah, 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 blah. Guys, before week 16 in the NFL this year, the Giants were a worse football team than the Titans. Drew Lock accidentally won them a game that lost them this spot. The Titans completely and utterly fumbled and stumbled into the number 1 pick. It was a complete luck. And now all of a sudden the Titans are too worse of a team and have too many holes, but the Giants aren't, and they definitely should draft a quarterback. What are we talking about? It all doesn't make any sense. So that is why I am saying to all of you, the quarterback situation, if you are a team that needs a quarterback and doesn't have one, like the Titans, like the Giants, like the Cleveland Browns, if we're being honest, like the Jets, like the Raiders, in these situations, when you have a quarterback that is talented, no doubt, nobody can argue that, and you're considering that player at that pick, if you're convicted on that player, then you should 100% take them. And it doesn't matter what anybody's grade on him is. It doesn't matter that Cam Ward's ranked 17th over all the other prospects. None of that, because you're getting the player that you feel good about. And Titans fans should know that if that happens, then we should feel very good about the evaluation process and knowing that we have the guy, and we should not be tripping that we stayed at the 101, took the player and didn't acquire more assets. Because at the end of the day, you can acquire all the assets you want. You have to hit on the pick. So I don't know. It's just, I'm sorry. When that conversation comes up and it's like everyone universally that has ever done a mock draft right now before the combine, everyone has the Giants taking a quarterback. And there's a lot of people who have the Giants trading up with us and then taking a quarterback. And you're telling me that a quarterback's not good enough to be taken 101 with the Titans just because they wear these colors. Doesn't make any sense.
I think going back to the conversation are they worth being the 101 pick? I think it is, and if we're just comparing to last year's draft, and we've seen that many times now, these guys would be behind Michael Penix, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that is wisdom to just look at last year's draft because it was a historically great quarterback class. I think where Titans fans come off is PTSD of looking at this past really decade of drafted quarterbacks. And you look at it from Mitchell Trubisky to even Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson, Will Levis. That whole year was talked about as this generational draft class with the quarterbacks. And you can keep going down the list. And there's just more and more, even Zach Wilson and even Trevor Lawrence to an extent. And at the end of the day, if they're not a top 5 difference maker, you really just have another guy, in my opinion. Even in the top 10, there's still they're not doing enough to get you to the next level. So I think when you're playing the safe route, you go for the talent of these other guys that might be on the board and you help build around it. And you take the path of like an Eagles or Detroit Lions where they build through the trenches, they develop. And I don't think anybody's arguing that Jared Goff is a top 5 quarterback. I would even argue Jalen Hurts is outside of the top 5. Getting close, and I mean, coming off the greatest game of his entire career, maybe you can make that discussion, but I don't think he's there. I think he just has so much talent around him. It makes him look like he's that good. Even going back to Matthew Stafford's Super Bowl, I think that is very much in that same realm as well. So you could potentially go, hey, I do have a first round grade on this guy. And if we hit on him, we are set for the next decade plus. But if we don't, we're still in QB purgatory. But if you don't take the shot either, you're forever in QB purgatory. So there's two sides to every coin. And for Titans fans to say, well, they used to have a great pass rush. They had 9 sacks on Joe Burrow and they lost the game. Well,
that is fair.
That's not equivalent.
That is not fair, though. It's not the same team, but it is a fair conversation to have. 9 sacks is ridiculous. If you sack it, the Eagles didn't have 9 sacks on Patrick Mahomes. So to say that, like, it is different, and the team was very different, but it's a very valid point because your quarterback played bad enough to lose you the game, despite how good your defense played. So again, like, if you don't have the quarterback, you absolutely have to do your damnedest to make sure that you check that box. And that is a really good, a real-time example. That was only, we're only a handful of years removed from that. And I mean, hell, 2 of the players that were on that defensive line that were responsible for that 9 sacks are on the team still. Like,
we're comparing apples to apples, though. We see a team that didn't blitz 0 times. The Titans in that game had to blitz 50%.
A lot, yes.
And that's when you're stressing that secondary. And it's not apples to apples because you're looking at guys out there like Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean who are rookies out there playing lights out because they're allowed to do what they need to do and they know their guys are going to get home. And that's how you beat Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. We've seen it twice now with Tampa Bay and now the Eagles. You get pressure with 4 is how you win. And I think if you don't have that, you're just SOL. And that's it at the end of the day. We haven't seen a quarterback go toe-to-toe that was in that same realm of Patrick Mahomes. You can argue Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow. These guys, they haven't done enough to get over the hump in the AFC to get there. It's just the state of the fact. If you want to beat him, you beat him through pressure. And I think that's a huge part. Both sides of the coin, though, you have to have the quarterback that is good enough not to lose you the game and has the ability to operate outside of scheme to win it when it breaks down. So I don't know if one of these guys that are coming out this year is that guy, but I'd be fine with them taking the shot. And that's perfectly fine, too. We're closing in.
There's a comment I wanted to get to really quick, Jake, before we move on. Because I kind of thought through it a little bit more. I think Daniel in the chat asked, if you're trading back with the Raiders at 6, who would be the pick? I like Teteroa McMillan. Teteroa McMillan, to me, if he's available, is my comp for him is he's kind of like Mike Evans and OBJ if they fuse together. Like he's like slim and spectacular like OBJ, but he's got like the catch radius and he plays really tough. The same way that Mike Evans does. So I like him as a player, but honestly, as much as I hate to say it, it probably makes more sense that the Titans are, if they do trade, if there is a scenario where they're trading to 6 or 7, there's a pair of tackles that are pretty darn good. Like Will Campbell, Kelvin Banks. Like there's some guys where if they traded down, that could make some sense. But also there's another player that gets me a little excited too. Tyler Warren, potentially. In the tent, like if they were to trade back with like the Saints, for example. So they have some, there's a couple of guys that are interesting that could add some serious talent to this team. I mean, they decided to move on or decided to pass on Brock Bowers. I don't think Warren is necessarily Bowers level of talent, but he's pretty darn good.
He's very good. I think Dave Brugler put out, he was in his top 4, if I remember correctly, as far as just prospects. And I might be getting the analyst wrong, but it was somebody I highly respected. I was like, okay, I know he's definitely up there, but that's as high as I've seen him.
I wonder how he compares to Brock.
I think Tyler Warren is maybe a better blocker. I think Brock Bowers, what we saw, I mean, he was 17 in the SEC, destroying it as a freshman. He was generational. If it wasn't for the injuries, he would be talked about highly up there. So let's just go ahead and go through a mock draft, and we're going to use NFL draft professors. You can see the logo on the other side of my jacket, but we don't have the ability to look at next year's picks, but we can assume pick 6 is in there. I'm assuming probably next year's first for the Raiders, not Oakland anymore. And then we're looking at a second or third round pick probably this year as well. We're cooping some of that. I think it could be something like this year's first, next year's first, and then this year's second potentially, which would be 37. Would you agree with that?
I mean, it would be more than that. Yeah. If
I think you're going to throw some pick swaps in there. There's going to be some later rounds in there as well.
I think if you're picking, if the Titans are moving beyond 3, these compensation packages are a little bit more than what people are thinking, right? Like when you're moving from 1 to 6, when you're going to number 1, you have the ability to pick any player. Like there's always a premium, and you got to assume there's a quarterback premium with it too. The interesting part for the Raiders is that I don't think that they necessarily want to do this. I think that Russell Wilson is going to be a Raider because of the hire with Pete Carroll. But let's say they don't bring in Russell Wilson. Let's say they do want a quarterback, one of these young guys. To me, it's the swapping of first here. You get next year's 1, you get pick 37, you get pick 68. You probably get pick like 106 instead of 70, whatever. Then you get a next year's probably 4th and maybe like next year's 6th, something along those lines. The Titans will want to add talent. They'll want to add picks next year. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's like 2 1s, 2 2s, maybe instead of this year's 3, it's next year's 3, and then maybe like a late pick or 2. And then the Titans probably send like a 4th or a 5th this year since they have an extra one.
I would assume it would be something like I would be willing to bet they would probably use their second round being 73 opposed to 68 in a trade like that scenario. And I would think maybe us sending back one of our additional 4ths to maybe move up a few spots in that same round.
Yep.
And then
you would get capital next year too. So
you get lots of capital next year. And then Daniel in the comments brings up a great comment that there's also the Max Crosby possibility, which would shore up one of those edges.
That is a good point.
And I would love that. I know Max is wanting to go to a winning team, and I'm sorry, Titans fans, but we aren't a winning team as of right now. And maybe the Raiders accommodate him to that. Maybe they don't.
It's a good point. Like Borgonzi probably strong arms because
you're making that call.
Major need. Yeah,
you're definitely putting that on the table.
So let's say Crosby's on the table. Then what compensation wise? I think Crosby is worth third. I think you lose more than the third. I think
you would too.
I think you probably say, hey, Crosby needs to be in the deal, and we still need to swap picks. They probably are like, we're not giving you our 26 first if we're sending you Crosby, which I'm fine with. So I would say like pick 6, pick 37, pick 106, Max Crosby, and then a second and a third next year.
Yep, I'd be good with that.
Or like a second and a 4th.
Yeah, we'll throw them 118 back too. So we'll go ahead and offer this on, and it was accepted. Maybe we could have got more. We'll never know. But we'll go ahead and start this draft.
They didn't have Max Crosby in there either.
yeah, exactly. That's very true. So how does this break down? And it's just how we would kind of anticipate Shador going 101, Travis Hunter to the Browns, and maybe they snag Cameron Ward there potentially. But if they don't, I mean, I think these two could just be swapped. You could have Cameron Ward or Travis Hunter go into either of these top 3. And if they don't, I think Mike Vrabel is running in that car for Travis Hunter.
Or in this case,
Abdul Carter's. This is like dream made in heaven for the newly, not yet, John Robinson interviewing over there with Jacksonville. He would probably take somebody else here.
Mason Graham could make sense for the Jags too. So I think if you swap,
yes, it would. Yeah, and these are blue chips, and this is kind of why we were talking about it earlier. This is kind of where my blue chips end, and I don't consider the quarterbacks blue chips, but they're talented enough to be in that top 5, and they should go in the top 5.
Titans are in a great spot here. Teteroa and McMillan right there at the top. He's a great player. Jalen Walker, really good player. Will Campbell, and then you have an option. You can take Will Campbell, move JC to the right, and then boom, we're chilling. We got our bookend tackles. So there's a lot of possibility here. Keep scrolling, players. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of guys I don't necessarily know I would take them at 6. I think Teteroa McMillan is probably the pick in this case, but like, Will Campbell is really intriguing here. Kelvin Banks, like wherever you put those guys, tackle 1 or 2. I don't really know where I sit as of right now. I haven't got to watch enough tape, but one of those tackles is really interesting. And yeah, it just kind of depends on what the free agent stuff is. So in this scenario, the Titans likely went and got their quarterback in free agency, no matter what that is. And then they are looking for talent. They just traded for Max Crosby. They have a second and a fourth next year, whatever. And then they have an insane amount of picks this year. The Titans of this Raiders trade have pick 35. They have pick 37, which in my opinion, depending on how the board fell, they could pair one of those in a late pick to jump up in the draft and try to move a couple spots to maybe grab a guy that might fall or whatever. But then you're in a good spot because all the talent, or most of the talent in this draft is in the second round, right? Like second, top of the third type of deal. Like there's a lot of depth here. So the Titans can add another edge rusher. They can add a tackle. But right here, there's only one premium receiver left, in my opinion, and it's Tet McMillan. So I don't know. It would be really hard for me to pass on Tet if I'm the Titans in this scenario.
So here's my thing on the tackles, and I know that's going to be what most fans are talking about here. And you'll see on this list, I mean, there's some talent here, and we are missing a player.
Where's Will Campbell?
That's what I'm trying to figure out. Okay. And this is kind of what I was going to bring up, is when you look at what Brian Callahan warrants in his tackles, he's a size queen. He likes big size. You look at J.C. Latham, mountain of a man, and you can go back to even when he was with Cleveland, same kind of structure that he wants there with Paris Johnson that was at Ohio State, mountain of a man. Yep. He likes those big tackles, and there's a reason Peter Skoronski isn't playing tackle, and he's still a guard. Will Campbell in the same right, I think is going to be a guard of the next level, or he would be on this team at least. So that's what worries me. And then you'll see the guy right below him, Jonah Savanaga. I disagree. I think that guy is a tackle. He's got the length and stuff. So that's huge for me. I think you can address the interior offensive line later in this draft, and I think it could still be a huge need with our center coming back from Achilles injury and Dylan Radin's not under contract. We'll see if they bring him back or not going into free agency. But I'm not big on any of these guys here at the top as far as tackles. Kelvin Banks, kind of same boat, could be a guard. Josh Simmons coming off the ACL injury, who would probably be my OT1 if it wasn't for that. The tape looked great this season before he went down. And then Josh Carnolly getting bull rushed at the Senior Bowl by
lost some points.
He lost some points to Mike Green over here. But I still think he could be up there and one of the most athletic tackles in this year's class, going with Connerly, and I'd be fine with that. Teteroa McMillan, I'm a little bit lower on. The size, I think, is amazing, but when you look at guys that are that tall, the change of direction does struggle for times, and I don't know if he can overcome that. So that's my biggest question mark for him. But the playmaking is there. My number one would actually be Luther Burden at Mizzou. I loved his tape last year. I had him highly regarded because there was talks that he might be coming out, and he ultimately returned to school to have a, in my opinion, lesser season. But the talent is there, and Mizzou didn't utilize him to his fullest extent, in my opinion. And when I watch a guy like him, I just come back to like the first year of covering the draft, and there was this player coming out of USC, and he just glided across the field. And I kept looking at him and going, I don't know where to rank this guy because he doesn't look like he's moving fast. He doesn't do anything that just super stands out to me. But I think the talent is still there. And then that guy went on to become Amon-Ra St. Brown, who the Titans pass on in the 6th round to draft a different receiver when we all knew, 4th round, and we knew that Amon-Ra should have been the guy. So I think Luther Burden's very much in that same realm to me. He just kind of glides across the field. Justin Jefferson was another one that kind of did that. But we will let you have this one, and it sounds like Tetero McMillan is your pick. And I know I'm in the minority with this. So let's go.
I don't love this pick at 6, right?
And
like you want to be able to trade down a little bit. You want to be able to trade down a little bit and feel very convicted about like, okay, we got a very good player right here. And I don't think that I do think Tetero McMillan is a really good player, but I agree with you. He is schematically a very specific player. I think he makes sense for the Titans because of the big body X type.
He looks like a Brian Callahan receiver.
He does. Yeah, he looks like a T Higgins, like a smaller Mike Evans. That's kind of what you need in this offense right now. It's basically just like fancy NWI, really, right?
Yes.
So
yeah, hyped up NWI. I like that.
Yeah. So I like the player. I just don't know that I love being at that spot. So who knows? Maybe these pair of second round picks will be juicier for the Titans.
And this is where I think the talent is going to be on the board. And like we talked about it in the beginning of the show, this is where you can get a first round guy for a second round value. And we're over here at 35. Ursery, that probably would have been one of my picks to shore up that right side of the right tackle. Coming out of Minnesota, great length, maybe lacks some athleticism. But I loved his tape. We can look at some of these other guys on the board. Anthony Belton had a great Senior Bowl and is flying up boards. Wyatt Millam, I think, is a guard, and I didn't necessarily like what I saw at the Senior Bowl. Cam Williams, I'm just not a big Cam Williams guy, and maybe it's my Oklahoma love foreshadowing and blinding me, but I didn't like really either of these tackles coming out of Texas this season. And Cam, super raw, but has all the talent in the world. If you can develop that and you trust, which if I'm trusting a guy to do it, it's Bill Callahan. And I think you could definitely look at that. So just kind of breaking down where we are at this point, you've got Max Crosby. You signed him to a long-term deal. You've got Tet McMillan. You've shored up that receiver position. You could potentially look at another edge here to shore up that other side. We can talk about, and I'm sure we will in future shows, that Harold Landry might be a cap casualty this upcoming year. It's going to save Titans a lot of money, and he's the only viable starter, and I would still use that word loosely there at this point in his career. And then you've got some of these wide receivers I'm not super high on. You can look up Bill Sparks. Restrepo's good. I don't think he matches what we want to do here. And the size just isn't there. I think he is a strict slot only at the next level. And I think you can still get a guy that's comparable later in this draft, even potentially, if not free agency. I think they're going to want a little bit more size there. Alec A.O. Manor, great wide receiver coming out of Stanford. Great athleticism, one of the youngest ones in this class out of this wide receiver group, and has all the talent in the world. If you go back to last season, this is the guy that absolutely dunked on Travis Hunter. Go for 200 yards plus. I think he had 3 touchdowns in that game. So, but outside of that, very hot and cold. He can have those huge blow-ups. He can also finish a game without a catch potentially. Yeah. So that's very, very hot and cold. I really like Trey Harris.
What are the tackle options at this point?
So we got Cam Williams, or Armand Minbu, or Anthony Belton would be the 3 that I'm really looking at here. And we can see Daniel in the comments says Minbu is the pick. And I would tend to agree. I really like Minbu, and another one of these guys that just maybe doesn't have the length to stick out at tackle at the next level. But if he doesn't work out, you kick that guy into guard, and we're talking great prospect. But I think he can stick at tackle, just like I thought as of last year's Mizzou tackles. I can't name his escaping right now, but I thought he was a tackle as well. So in my opinion, we're going Minbo here.
And here's the thing, like, obviously this is super arbitrary because free agency has to happen first, right? Like who knows? Like the Titans could be, could be super in on Trey Smith. They could be super in on Josh Sweat. If they land one of those guys, then, who knows? Maybe that type of trade doesn't happen. Maybe the Titans take a different trade. Maybe they are interested in the Giants pick Maybe the Cleveland Browns take Abdul Carter because they're trading Myles Garrett. Like there's so much that has to happen here, which is why I typically don't like to dive into mock draft season too hard until at least until after free agency and the combine has happened, because there's a lot that has to change here, folks, before we can have like meaningful conversations about what can happen.
And it's very interesting in this scenario because with this trade down, we literally almost have back-to-back picks with only Jacksonville sitting in the middle of us.
And honestly, it might make sense for the Titans to be like, don't give us your second this year, just give us your first next year.
Yes.
Like we don't want any extra twos. Give us a 1 and a 3 next year. Crosby, you're 1 this year. You know, you're 3 and like a 4 or something. You know what I'm saying? Like they probably try to load up next year a little heavier. Because for this reason, because like you're sitting at pick 35, and who knows how the draft falls. You know, some people can fall, like they're going to do some evaluating. They might be higher on a certain tackle than whatever, right? But this draft is going to be really tricky because it's going to be like, okay, can we win the draft in the second and third round by picking players we feel really, really strongly about? If you miss out in the top 5, like obvious blue chip players, cool. Okay, can we find talent in these second and third rounds? And that's what the Titans are going to be it's going to be a balancing act. But I don't love this draft for the Titans in many ways. Like there's like decent edge depth, which is nice. There's like decent tackle depth. I don't know if any of those beyond the top, like 2 or 3 of them are like starter caliber players. I don't know, but you know, it's going to be really challenging. So who knows? Borgonzi and the staff might be happy with where they're picking 1 and 35 in this draft and just try to like find some loose change in the later rounds. But if I had to guess, like they're going to be trading for future assets pretty heavily if they do decide to trade, which again, I don't know that makes the most sense.
Yeah. So we're back up on the clock here at 37. And so far, if you guys are just tuning in, we traded for Max Crosby. We end up with Ted McMillan. We come into the second round, we get Mimbu. So we've addressed the edge position, the tackle position, and the wide receiver core. And then we're back up on the clock here in the second round. And there's still a multitude of talent here. And this is where it gets interesting to me. Do you address edge again? Do you hit the wide receiver room again? Or do you maybe look at maybe a less valuable position like linebacker or safety, which definitely could use.
Can we show you all the edge? Can you show us all the edges?
100%. So we got JT Tuimoloau out of Ohio State. Great, safe player, in my opinion. Can set the edge very well. Former 5-star, I believe the number 1 overall prospect in the year he came out to Ohio State. Yep, Landon Jackson, great size amongst those two guys. Braden Swinson, I'm a little bit lower on. Kyle Kennard and even Donovan Ozaraku out of Boston College. I'm not sleeping on Ozaraku. I think that length, he's not super tall, but super long arms, weird kind of body type. I think he could be a very good fit for the Titans here if you're just looking to develop into a passer. Yeah, for sure. Oh, wrong side. And then we got Jack Sawyer here. That another great, who I would actually have ranked slightly higher of the Ohio State.
Jack Sawyer's the pick here.
I would agree. I think he is a first-round talent. And I wouldn't anticipate him being there, but he very well – I'm not good. The draft is a crapshoot. We talk about it every year. This guy is a surefire first-round pick, and then he's sitting there and day 3 sometimes, and it just does. The NFL sees things differently a lot of the times, and a lot of it comes down to they get to have those discussions with the guys. They get to see those medicals. They get to have so much more information there. But now you pair Jack Sawyer up with Max Crosby on the edge, and then have Jeffrey Simmons and Tavondre Sweat on the interior. That is a great front 4 from the get-go. Great. And we're just going to decline any other offers at this point in time. We could discuss it, but we're running out of time here, and we kind of need to burn through this. So at this point in time, we've got some picks in, and we can start playing around with this a little bit more and find some value and Anthony Belton being here on the clock, I don't see that happening personally. I think he's
I was about
improved
to
too
say,
much, and I feel like the simulator hasn't caught up to it just yet. So I'm kind of ignoring that pick here. That's when you can look at a guy who like Pat Bryant, who out of Illinois was one of my top wide receivers in this class. I think I have him as wide receiver 5 right now.
wow.
But again, I'm very above consensus on him, I'll say. Most people have him around that 9 to 12 range kind of thing. We can scroll down here and we're looking linebacker. We need another running back potentially. I love Kobe King out of Penn State. Great, thick body pause. And Dylan Sampson, I know Vols fans, we've got to cater to him from time to time.
Really good player.
But I think there's definitely some more talent to be had. Somebody in the comments earlier today mentioned how we need a little bit more depth at the interior defensive line with when Tavondre or Simmons comes out. And I don't necessarily agree. I think it might be the deepest position we might have on the team as of right now.
Yeah, they're going to bring back Sebastian Joseph Day.
Yes, and then he played great when he's in.
Yeah, Coburn's a practice squad player, but he's serviceable.
So when we look at these guys, I think Howard.
There is a lot of internal. There is a lot of depth here at this position, though, in the draft.
Oh, okay, so the safety here, and like we talked about it earlier in the show, you got a safety under contract, and it's Amani Hooker, and that is it. So the position is going to be addressed not only through free agency, but also probably through the draft at some point in time as well. And when you look at some of these guys that are left here on the board, I look at a guy like Jonas Sanker, who I covered on the Draft Professors podcast just a couple of weeks ago. This is a guy that I wasn't familiar with his game. And big body dude, plays at, I believe, 6'3", if I remember correctly, 6'2". Great size for the position. And this is a guy that played 8-man football in high school over there in Virginia and is a playmaker for them. He very well, and they have him as 51 as a best player available. He might be in my top 75 picks right now. He is that good. So that is a guy that I'd definitely be entertaining here for sure. But then, yeah, if we're just looking for talent overall, RJ Harvey, Dylan Sampson, tight end, they'll probably bring in one additional guy. So for me, I'm looking at Pat Bryant, Dylan Sampson, Kobe King, or Jonas Sanker as of right now. Is there a guy that you kind of lean forward towards more, or are we looking at maybe need a little bit more of a talent?
Pat Bryant is a really good value at 101. The Titans obviously drafted Tet McMillan, so that, you know, it's probably pretty likely that they want NWI back after the season he had, and maybe he offers them a little bit of a hometown discount. But Pat Bryant makes sense. Going safety here also probably makes some sense, especially if you really like the value. So I'm fine with either going Pat or Jonah at this point.
Let's go Pat, just because I think that is a guy that could potentially slip into the 4th round and is a guy that a team's going to grab there and be super happy with.
Oh, look, we still get our safety because we have an additional 4th round pick.
And that's how it works out sometimes. So you just run that card into that point.
I was going to say, where are the quarterbacks at, but that's okay.
Kyle McCord was still on the board there, I believe, and that might have been the guy I have highest at this point in time. Just because outside of the top 2, you got Milroe, you got Dart, and then you got McCord and Riley Leonard, and that's kind of how it gets at this point in time. You could even look at a Dylan Gabriel or a Curtis Rourke. Personally, I really like Kyle McCord, and a lot of it comes back to even just looking at the analytics of the position. I went through and pulled the last decade of every drafted quarterback and just kind of compared them apples to apples. What did they do for passing yards? What did they do for completion percentage? Who scored the most touchdowns? Who had the turnover-worthy plays? And one of the things that stood out to me, and it seems so arbitrary, but just how many passing yards did they have in their career was one of the biggest benefactors. You looked at guys like, I can't recall it. There was weeks ago that I looked at it, but Will Howard was up there with some of the greats, and it was a green, Will Howard, green, and then it got into some of the bad ones. So I think that's
I don't love him, but this would be the pick.
No,
if Will Howard is somehow there at 140 in the 5th
I'd be
round,
perfectly fine with that. Yes, I'd be perfectly fine with that.
Take a flyer on the
development.
development.
Dylan Gabriel doesn't have the ability to develop into a star, but just going through his processing, and the size isn't there either. But this is a guy that I think could be like this year's Brock Purdy to an extent. I don't think he'll be as good as Brock is, but it wouldn't be surprising to me if he came in and comes in as a backup. There's an injury ahead of him and he looks serviceable, and then people are talking about him as a future starter in the league. And I think they might get tricked into that. But I think this is the guy that could at least have that conversation through the media and stuff. Daniel comment says, don't sleep in Gabriel, though. Smart dude. And I would 100% agree. I got to watch him at UCF. I got to watch him at Oklahoma, and I got to watch him at Oregon now. So I'll turn the hat around. I got the big OU right there. And then I am a Dylan Gabriel stan, but I do see the limitations there. So going back to this, we're in the 5th round now. This is kind of where it gets a little bit yucky. Got to shout out Willie Lampkin right here. Great Senior Bowl. There's clips of him going up against Kentucky's Deontay Walker, who's like 6'5", 330, might be 6'7", if I recall correctly. Willie Lampkin is who Aaron Brewer clone to an extent. Super small inside guy, and stood him up. Fast striking hands. I really liked Willie Lampkin there. I haven't watched any tape from North Carolina looking at him specifically, but this is the guy that I really liked here as well. But when I'm looking at value, I mean, LaQuint Allen, Dylan Sampson, you're probably going to address the running back position at some point through free agency or the draft. And I think that's where value might fit a not need, but it still needs to be addressed nonetheless. So that might be where I go here. Is there anybody you'd like to see?
No, I think Dylan is fantastic value at this point. I mean, again, I have to be like very hard pressed in saying this. This mock draft is toasted cheeks, because this is going to completely change. Like, we are living in fairy tale land where Dylan Sampson isn't a sooner pick than the 5th round. Yes. He's a really good player. There's a ton of value. There's a ton of depth at the running back position this year as well. But Dylan is a really good player. And like a lot of these guys, like even, I don't know, like I just feel like there's going to be so much that's going to change from now until even the combine. And then from combine to pro day, I'm just very anti mock draft this early in the process, because it gets people excited and like almost like blind excitement. You know what I'm saying?
I think it more so is used to put prospects on your radar. You get a little bit of understanding who they might be and how they might fit into a potential scheme, and learn a little bit more about the people, opposed to just seeing a name up on a card on draft day. And that's kind of how I view it. And it does help build out my big board and all that stuff as well. And I think it serves a purpose. But at the end of the day, if you're going, this is what's going to happen in April, and you're doing it in January, sorry to break it to you, bud, but it's going to change over its head. Yeah. So we're back here in the 6th round, correct? I believe it's 5th round still. I guess we do have 2 5th round picks. Or at least it doesn't list it. So either way, it's fine. We're on the board here at 166. We've drafted just about every position. We have cornerback up here as a need. I don't think that is a need really at all, especially what we saw out of Jarvis Brownlee Jr. We got L'Jarius Steed coming back. You've got Awuzie under contract for at least one more year. And then you got Roger McCreary on the interior. So, I mean, you got 4 guys that played very well, or have the ability to play very well. And even some of the undrafted free agents they brought in last year have some talent that can at least come in in a stint if they needed to. If the talent was on the board, I'd be perfectly fine with it, though. I just don't think it is at this point in time. Lots of comments here that we could get a punt returner or a kicker time. We also need more in offensive line. I think linebacker could still be addressed as well. So let's pull up those positions. And again, Willie Lampkin still on the board. Also, Memphis's own Chandler Martin. Guy's a freaking bulldog. Covered him like 2 or 3 months ago and loved his tape. Undersized. He's got that stockier body. I think he's like 5'10", 5'11", but he sits at like 225, 230, maybe even 235. So super stocky dude that just wraps up, gets players to the ground, good blitzer, knows how to get skinny through the hole. Absolutely love that about him. And
absolute liability in the passing game.
Exactly. He fits the Titans to a T. We're talking linebackers. But you can look at other guys that are out here. Cody Lindenberg, not a super big fan. Shamar James out of Florida has just dealt with injuries this entire past year. This is a guy that I think was all SEC freshman team coming out, and definitely liked him there. Cody Simon kind of came in as a pinch this past season and played very well. But we're just going to kind of wrap these up because at this point in time, there's not a lot that needs to kind of transpire because, like we said, it's gonna change vastly. So we're gonna go Willie Lampkin here, and we'll be back up on the 6th, and then we got 1/7 this season, correct? So here, I think we've addressed a lot of it. You could again look at these.
Did we train our 7th for Nick Folk from this season, or was it a different year?
I feel like we still do have a 7th, but we'll go Chandler Martin, and because I think we had 2. We acquired one from a different trade, if I remember correctly.
Kyron Lacey just got drafted.
Nope. Yeah. I feel like he's going to be off most teams' boards.
Yeah.
At this point in time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's unfortunate. Don't be a bad person.
Yeah,
that's what it comes down. Don't be an asshole.
He's a kid, man. He's got to.
The door's not closed. His NFL career might have to take a little.
Jimmy Horn Jr. in the 7th round.
Jimmy Horn. I mean, I know that was one of TD's guys, if I remember right. TD was talking about him at the Shrine Bowl.
Yeah, Jimmy. Yeah, he's good, bro. Good in short area. Good.
That entire Colorado team of wide receivers, they're all over the board. But
Nick Nash in the 7th round. Sign me up.
Hey, let's get it done. I would also shout out Power Eccles here.
7th round. I'm in. You wanted your punt returner.
Right. There he is. There he is.
Wow.
But that should wrap it up. We can scroll down.
I'm the most excited about that pick in the entire draft.
Well, we dressed wide receiver several times then.
3 times.
Yeah. We got, and there it is, boys. We got Ted McMillan, Armand Minbu. Yeah. Jack Sawyer, Pat Bryant, Jonas Sanker, Dylan Sampson, Willie Lampkin, Chandler Martin, and Nick Nash, and Max Crosby, just to sprinkle that a little bit on top. Let us know what you think, guys. We'll be doing, I'm sure, more of these as we progress through this draft year. We'll be talking more free agency as we come into that. We appreciate everybody in the comments shouting out Coach Wills, Daniel, Stevie, and everybody else from earlier in the show. We appreciate you guys. We will check y'all next week, though. Peace.